Kadangi mūsų diskusija vyks lietuvių ir anglų kalbomis, tie, kas angliškai arba lietuviškai nesupranta, galite pasiimti ausines, jos yra štai čia. Mes šiandien susitinkame su Europos Sąjungos literatūros premijos laureatų. Ir aš iš pradžių galbūt keliais žodžius pasakysiu apie pačią premiją, kokios yra jos sąlygos, ką jie suteikia, ir tai bus tarsi įvadas į mūsų diskusijų. Taigi, Europos Sąjungos literatūros premija yra skiriama nuo 2009 metų. Kasmet jį įvertinama 14 naujų autorių. Ką kiekvienas autorius gauna? Taigi, kiekvienam suteikiama kaip 2000 eurų premija, tačiau svarbiausia yra tai, kad suteikiama galimybė gauti knygų vertimo finansavimą pagal Europos Sąjungos programą kultūra. Europos Sąjungos literatūros premiją gali gauti rašytojai iš 36 Europos Sąjungos programą kultūra dalyvaujančių šalių. Kiekvienais metais yra sukuriamos nacionalinės komisijos ir jos būtent nominuoja premijos ratus į savos šalies autorius. Visos dalyvaujančios šalys premijai autorių gali sudaryti kas 3 metus. Tai yra premija, kuri teikiama kas 3 metus. Taigi visos dalyvaujančios šalys gali kas 3 metus siūlyti savo atstovus. Ir Lietuvos laureatais yra tapusios beje išimtinai entikai prozininkės moterys. 2009 metais Europos Sąjungos literatūros premiją gavo laureatų už knygą Dalyvauja Marmara. 2012 metais Giedra buvo nominuota už Estiją šiandien žmogaus pilietybę. 2015 metais Europos literatūros sąjungos premijos laureatė gavo Unija Vilniaus už romanų Žuvys ir kalbomis, o 2019 Daina Opolskaitė už novelių rinkinį Dienų piramidės. Štai mes turime 4 Europos Sąjungos literatūros premijos laureatus. Aš tiesiog visus trumpai pristatysiu ir labai bendrais bruožais nusakysiu, pasistengsiu nusakyti apie ką buvo jau tyrinėta, kad jūs tiesiog galėtumėte bendrą kontekstą suvokti. Taigi, Carson, prozininkė iš Šiaurės Airijos, Belfasto, ji debiutavo 2014 metais romanu Malcolm Orange. Taip pat parašė novelių knygą ir flash fiction, čia tikriausiai būtų, net nežinau, fikcija, ne fikcija, greitoji fikcija, rinkinė atvirukų istorijos. Šį rinkinį sudaro tekstai, kurie iš tiesų buvo parašyti ant atvirukų ir susiūti įvairiose šalyse gyvenantiems draugams. Tai viena vertus fikcija, kita vertus tarsi ir autofikcija, autentiški tekstai. O Europos Sąjungos prizą Shyyan laimėjo 2019 metais už romaną Padeginėtojai Firestarters. Tai yra knyga apie smurtą, fizinį ir psichologinį, apie atmintį ir susipriešinimą. Veiksmas vyksta Belfaste. Belfastas apskritai yra ta erdvė, kur didžioji dalis jos knygų veiksmo vyksta. Tai yra miestas turintis labai specifinę kultūrinę atmintį, tokią trauminę atmintį galbūt, nes konfliktai tarp protestantų britų ir katalikų airių čia dažnai pasibaigdavo įvairios smurto formos. Tai yra tiek riaušant, tiek bombų sprogimai, tiek padeginėjimai. Šiuo metu tos riaušės aplipusios ir Belfastas tapęs tarsi ramybės, tačiau ta atmintis ir buvusio smurto pėdsakas, jis yra ganėtinai prisodrinęs tas erdves. Pagrindiniai jų personažai yra du tėvai, kurie patiria problemas augindami savo vaikus. Vieno iš jų sūnus pradeda internete platinti video, kuriame skatinama padeginėti. Čia tokia sužetinė užuomazga, kuri vėliau plėtojama, bet man įdomiausia pasirodė, kad tas globalus Belfasto kontekstas miesto panorama labai išsamiai atskleidžiama ir susipriešinama. Meelis Friedenthal yra rašytojas ir teologas. Jis Europos Sąjungos literatūros premiją laimėjo 2013 kitais metais ir jo kūrybai specifiška tai, kad jisai derina skirtingų žanrų. Tai yra istorinis romanas, siaubo romanas, nuotykių, mistikos elementų, žodinės kūrinius, pokalbos. Jam taip pat itin svarbus istorinis lokalus kontekstas. Didžioji dalis jo kūrinių veiksmo vyksta Tartu, Estijos universitetinėme miestelyje, kuriame Meelis ir Estija. Tačiau dažniausiai tas laikmetis tai ne šios dienos, o vėlyvųjų, nežinau, viduramžių, 16-17 amžiaus. Ir naujausiame romane Melankolija, kuris yra išleistas į lietuvių kalbą, jį galite jau įsigyti mugės metu. Veiksmas taip pat vyksta Tartu, 17 amžiuje, į Tartu atvyksta studentas, toks viduramžiškas su upė, jisai serga keista liga, melankolija, juodosios vilčies liga ir jo nuotykiai tam prasideda. Haska Shyyan, ukrainietė rašytoja, vertėja, blogerė, influencerė, jinai debiutavo 2014 metais romanu Medžiok, daktarė Medžiok, o Europos Sąjungos prizą laimėjo 2019 metais už romaną Užnugaryje. Pagrindinė šio kūrinio tema - karinis konfliktas Ukrainoje, tačiau jisai nušviečiamas per labai individualią prizmę, per moters perspektyvą. Jauna pora išsiskiria, nes vaikinas rašo savanorių ir išvyksta kariauti. Mergina lieka jo laukti ir tas laukiančios žmonos, laukiančios moters, laukiančios merginos pasirodytis saviveikis, kuris iš pat pradžių jai atrodė per siauras, netinkamas, kuo toliau, tuo labiau komplikuojasi. Taigi vėl mes turim tą patį lokalų kontekstą ir tokias, galima sakyti, nacionalinės temas. Daina Opolskaitė, lietuvių novelistė, laimėjo Europos Sąjungos premijos taip pat 2019 metais už esė rinkinį Dienų piramidės. Tai antroji autorės knyga ir Daina yra įvardijama kaip sakinio meistrė, kaip lietuvių lyrinės novelės žanro atstovė, jai svarbus psichologizmas, galiminiai egzistenciniai klausimai, žmogaus sąmonės, jo santykio su aplinka problematika, dažnai akcentuojamos kaltės, nesusikalbėjimo, nesusipratimo temos. Taigi tokie yra laureatai ir čia iš karto galima akcentuoti tai, kad Europos Sąjungos literatūros premijai suteikia galimybę savo kūrinį paskleisti po visą Europą, nes yra finansuojamos vertimų programos, taip pat autorių prisistatymai, knygų pristatymai kitose šalyse. Taigi šios premijos dėka literatūra peržengė tik kalbos, bet ir erdvės ribas ir tampa tokia savotiškai literatūra be sienos, kas būtų atskirta tokiam lokaliam kontekste, dabar tampa to, ką galima daryti su Europos Sąjungos šalių skaitytojais. Ir tai aš sakyčiau ypač svarbu tokiai mažai šaliai kaip Lietuva, nes vertimai tiek finansuojami, bet žinoma, tas finansavimas visada nepakankamas. Taigi aš norėčiau užduoti pirmą klausimą Europos Sąjungos laureatams, rašytojams, kadangi jūsų knygos jau keliauja po Europą, jos yra verčiamos į įvairias šalis. Norėčiau paklausti, ką jums patiems reiškia literatūros literatūros? Ar to siekiate, ar manote, kad tai literatūrai apskritai yra svarbu? Nes kita vertus, kiekvienų jūsų kūryboje yra svarbus kitas lokalus kontekstas. Atrodo, jūs tikrai nerašėte knygos specialiai tam, kad jinai peržengtų sienas. Jūs pirmiausia analizuojate tas problemas, kurios svarbios ten, kur jūs gyvenate ir kur rašote. Gal nuo čia, kad pradėkime.
First of all, is this on? It's on. Yeah. First of all, can I say thank you very much for having me. This is my first time in Lithuania and it's been wonderful so far. So thank you. In terms of books crossing borders, I think when you're from somewhere like Northern Ireland that has such a complex history and such a troubled history. I think troubled is the best way to put it. Quite often when I travel around, people don't understand who we are or what's happened in Northern Ireland, and the idea that your book can tell those stories and can cross borders and can engage with people outside of the local, the space that you're from is really, really important. So firstly for me, books need to cross borders to get our stories of what happens in the places that we know out to the rest of the world. What I think is really interesting is that it works both ways. So as your work reaches out across borders, you engage with other people in different contexts and you hear their stories. So for me, one of the loveliest things about the EU Prize has been meeting these guys, particularly writers who come from other backgrounds that are post-conflict and have had the same experiences or similar experiences as we had in Northern Ireland. We get to learn from each other, we get to share our stories, and hopefully sometimes that means that we don't make the same mistakes again. So that has been one of the greatest pleasures for me of seeing literature cross borders.
Yeah, first of all, of course, thank you for inviting me here, and I'm very much agreeing with you. For the purpose of the prize, it seems to be just to bring different literatures and maybe also countries together, in the sense that the European Union comprises of many different and sometimes quite small countries, and we often don't know quite well what's happening there. And for example, in Macedonia, it's not still part of the European Union, so it's, you get to know the places, and it's also the possibility that you can introduce your country, not in the sense that you have written to the purpose of introducing it, but through literature, I think it's the best way to get to know the place. So to just have this opportunity to learn about different countries is wonderful, and different histories, of course, because what we are is very often comes through history. Our history just in a way dictates our presence. So I think that this kind of complicated historical backgrounds that many countries in Europe have is a literary gift in a way, so that we can use it and learn through it a lot.
Thank you. I think it's very symbolic to having this question today, as I was then reminded by my colleagues from the embassy. It's like Mother Language Day today, International Mother Language Day today. And I think as writers, we all feel like we can write mostly only in our mother language. Some of us more lucky, having their language more widespread worldwide. Some of us less lucky with that. But when you really put yourself, put your emotions into what you write, you really feel like doing it only in your mother tongue. And talking about traveling across the borders, to be honest, when I was writing my book, I was thinking about readers abroad. Because actually universal things, they're the same everywhere. We have this universal things like death, love, and I don't know, feelings. They travel from century to century, they travel from country to country. And the story of my hero, my book, it's actually very international and it can happen anywhere at any time. Like a girl waiting for her boyfriend from the army, from the war. And but when we read, it's true that we're really curious about how is it happening in another country, what is the context. For example, I just finished reading a very touching book, very moving book, Woman in Berlin. It's speaking about the end of the Second World War in Berlin. And it's really the most interesting thing, since it's a diary, it's like the context, the small details, how they were living, like what kind of furniture, what kind of sheets they were using. And I think the same about contemporary literature. When we write about what's happening in our country, we try to make people abroad understand the context. And the same when we read books from other countries, we try to understand the context. And I do agree with Jan that it's very important, like also as an experience about, especially when we speak about conflicts, as you speak in your book about post-conflict situations, I'm speaking about country being at war like right now. It's really important to share these experiences and to make people understand that we all go through the same feelings in this kind of context.
Kai išėjo knyga, tai Lietuvoje vienoje kolegos Europos pasakė, kad iš tikrųjų novelių pasaulis ir knyga tikrai yra pakankamai lietuviška, pakankamai tradicinė, tai tikrųjų mūsų tradicinė rodai, todėl iš tikrųjų sunkiai sugalvoju, kad tos novelės galėtų susitarti iš neeuropietiškų gražą. Bet šiuo atveju galbūt kažkokio atsiliepimų iš žaliamas susilaukus, nes tikrai lietuviai nėra pasaulyje, jie yra tikrai ruošiami, gyveni. Ir greičiausiai man žadėjo, kad pirmasis kinas turėtų pasirodyti Vilniaus pradžioje, vasaros pradžioje, ir pirmieji turėtų Bulgarija, Lietuva. Ir jau galbūt labai jau pasiriksime kažkokį interesį, nes tai nesusilaukus daug kalbos įspūdžių iš šių skaitytojų. Na ir kaip pratot, tai dar su mumis susiekė Graikijos leidykla, mažutė, kuri norės versti Dainų ramybės. Tai analogiškai aš jau radau išsakytus įspūdžius, tai knyga yra perskaityta, kad žodžiu žavusija ir kad tos novelės, lietuviškos, mano parašytos iš tikrųjų padarė įspūdį savo kalbą ir kažkokius turinio žinoma. Tai va galbūt tik tai tiek, kol aš esu girdėjusi, kažką išgirdusio, sakykime, man dar dalyvauti.
Man tas atrodo labai svarbus dalykas, ką jūs visi tikriausiai paminėjote, kad viena vertus literatūroje yra laureatų aspekto, bet kita vertus kalba ir universalia kalba. Nes dalis patirčiukas yra tiesiog universalios, net nesvarbu, kur vyksta galėtis konfliktas ar Ukrainoje, ar Europos, ar 17 amžiaus Estijoje, mes vis tiek suprantame, daugiau mažiau ką tai reiškia. Bet kita vertus ir dėl to mes galime kalbėti apie literatūrą be sienų, apie gaminti pačią tam tikras nacionalinės ribas, bet kita vertus egzistuoja kalba, kuri suteikia tam tikras ribas, tiesiog nacionalinės kalbas, raiškos priemonės ir įvairios literatūrinės tradicijos. Ir šiuo atveju man būtų įdomu sužinoti, ar jūs patys save suvokiate kaip priklausančius kažkokiai lokaliai savo kalbos anglakalbių, ukrainiečių literatūros tradicijų, ar vis tik jau vertinate tokiam bendram kontekste, nes man atrodo, kas keičiasi šiais laikais, mes visi be galo daug skaitome kitomis kalbomis ir visų pirma angliškai, ir tai be abejo keičia žinoma ir apie literatūrą, ir apie žanrus, ir apie dalykas yra universalu, ir kas nėra universalu. Tai koks jūsų santykis su tuo lokaliu, iš savo krašto, savo šalies literatūrinėmis tradicijomis ir su pasaulinė literatūra?
Iš tikrųjų, tas žvilgsnis į save ir apie bendrą estiją ir labai svarbus. Aš jau galbūt paminėjau patraukinius galbūt būtent su lietuviškąja tradicija ir kažkokiais lietuviškos literatūros romanais, kažkokiais svarbiais, sakykime, tokiais mūsų literatūrai ir veikėjais panašiais. Bet ir šiandien žiūrėkime žalgana, ypatingai žmonių praleidės ir žiniasklaidos atskiras novelės, aš manau, kad kai dabar iš jų yra labai lietuviškos, knygos laureatų, kaip buvo pasakyta. Bet kai kurios iš jų, aš manyčiau, kad vis dėlto peržengė tą lietuviškumą, mes ir galim ir visiškai galėtų būti rengiamos kaip tekstai, kurie galėtų būti ir ne tik šitoje, ne tik galėtų. Manau, kad yra labai knyga ir jinai įvairi dėl to, kad parašyta labai daug sako, visą metų, daug rūkščių. Bet kuo toliau, dabar šitas mintis, tokia, kurią buvau 7 metais, iš tikrųjų, verčiau pasižiūrėti save platesme kontekste. Ir mano labai jauti savo literatūrą, ir kiek literatūrą, kitas literatūras, ir mano žvilgsnis iš tikrųjų toksai daug platesnis, toksai visuotinesnis, ir susivokiu, kad yra tokie bendražmogiški dalykai, universalūs dalykai, kurie yra svarbūs mums visiems. Ir mes susitikėmės ir iš tikrųjų kalbėjome apie tai, kad Lietuvoje mes esame skirtingi, ir galbūt būtent tos skirtingos temos, vis dėlto egzistuoja tos universalūs paradigmos, kurios atsiranda mūsų kūriniuose, ir tos universalūs temos, kurios išlieka visada aktualios. Visų visų.
Ukrainian literature, like in historical sense, even for us Ukrainians, it does have this reputation of, like, you know, very depressive, like it's all about struggle, death, and misery, but like it's also about, because of our history, maybe, like, I don't know, maybe literature is similar because we've always been in the struggle of Ukrainians existing as such, having a right to write in Ukrainian language, and plus the way it's taught at schools, like, you know, you have this feeling, oh, it's really like another boring poem about struggle of Ukrainian people. But actually it's not even true, because there are also a lot of examples of very fun things in Ukrainian literature. And actually recently in Kyiv there was opening of exhibition from Kotlarevsky to contemporary Ukrainian literature, and Kotlarevsky was the guy who interpreted Airija. And he's kind of beginner of writing in Ukrainian as such, and he interpreted it in super fun ways, like kind of comedy, and I remember my grandpa reciting parts of it, like, so it shows that there were examples of very different literature in Ukraine, so maybe it's more also about the way we're taught to read it. And actually this exhibition is very nice also because there is this like Kotlarevsky, and then there's like very modern contemporary authors as like, you know, logical development of it. I do think that my writing belongs to Ukrainian tradition in some sense. I think even like there is some kind of archetype in my main character, this girl who is waiting guy from the army. A lot of that in folk songs, a lot of that in tradition. But also since we live in like this world which is becoming more like smaller and smaller than we think, of course there are like more parallels with what's happening abroad. For example, like the second part of my book is happening in France. So, but also like, you know, even in Ukrainian literature, 100 years ago, the characters were traveling. They were going to Vienna, and the orders were different. So there was also this experiencing and learning other places and other traditions. So yeah, I would say that it's both, like, belongs to Ukrainian literature, but I think it's very good that each literature these days starts to belong to something more global, and they're like more like mixing and overlapping.
Yeah, regarding the question whether my writing belongs to the tradition of Estonian literature, in one sense it is, of course, because we have a really strong tradition of historical fiction, but in another sense it's so that it doesn't follow the canons of this historical fiction, and it's maybe not purposefully different, but it's quite different from what's being done in this regard in Estonia. maybe due to the fact that I'm not coming from this literary tradition so much, but my background is academic research, and what I try to do in this book is to just give some kind of atmospheric feeling of the period, which is the main idea why I started writing at all. So, as such, it doesn't follow the storyline so much, but tries to just build the feeling period that I have received through my research of that. But another aspect here is that so that all the different European countries they have their own national language, where in which they write, the authors write, and it's the question of what transcend language borders is even, I think, more difficult than to answer the question of what transcends cultural borders, because it's fiction written in English is basically much more easily accessible, and nowadays we have mostly the translated literature also coming through English or from English authors. So authors that don't write in this big language, I think also you can just count German and French also in the big languages. In Italian, they are sort of competing against the bigger languages, bigger cultural fields. But for example, in Estonia, you have to write for 1 million people, basically, but you have to compete with all of the world literature. So this kind of crossing this language borders is, I think, one of the challenges that maybe the European Prize for Literature tries to solve, and I think that with it has been quite maybe successful in this regard, that many books have been now translated, but still I think that this is something that it's maybe possible to just really solve, because the smaller languages are in a disadvantaged position, and as one writer in Estonia quite recently said that you have this, when writing in a very small language, you have this feeling of absurdity, because you are just putting so much effort into something, and it's like building this kind of sand mandala that you are just trying very hard to do something, but you can guess that it's probably just remains there and it will be just swept away the next day. So this kind of mood in writing is also affecting writing, I think, and it's priced especially for smaller languages.
I guess when you grow up in Northern Ireland, you have to be really comfortable with having lots of identities at the same time. So I'm a little bit like a spy. I travel with 2 passports all the time. I have both a British passport and an Irish passport. And over the last 3 years, we've been having a little thing called Brexit in the part of the world that I've been from. And it has really forced me to think about identity. So who am I as a writer? Am I a British writer? Am I an Irish writer? Am I a European writer? Am I a world writer? And in some ways, there's not very much good that has come out of Brexit, but for me it has been good to ask myself these questions. And I'm really delighted sometimes that I fall between the 2 traditions, that there are aspects of my work that have been influenced by British writers. I'm a massive fan of writers like Graham Greene and Virginia Woolf, and even people like Jeanette Anderson, who write in the British tradition. But I guess, if I'm being really honest, and let's not tell anybody this outside of this room, I am definitely an Irish writer. Who would not want to be associated with the likes of Beckett and Joyce and Edna O'Brien and all the fantastic writers who come out of that canon? So I'm very proud to be an Irish writer. But the strange thing is, this wee book, which won the EU Prize for Literature this year for Ireland, is actually about the people who call themselves British in Northern Ireland. And to me, that actually embodies everything that's wonderful about Europe, that Ireland would give a prize to someone who sees themselves as British. There's all sorts of layers of complexity there, and I love that. And I think the thing that is so scary for me moving into the next phase as we leave the European Union is that my identity might be reduced in some way, that I might not be able to call myself all of those different labels at one time. So the more that we can get together and do this and meet each other and talk about the complexities of what it means to be a writer who writes in a world that's increasingly multi-identified. Very few of us now are just one thing. We travel, we're influenced by writers from all over the world. You maybe live in a country that you weren't born in or didn't grow up in. So our identities are increasingly complex. And I think that brings a richness to literature rather than reducing it. So I'm quite proud to be both an Irish writer and a little bit of a British writer, definitely more Irish.
Kadangi mes čia turime galimybę tiesiog dalintis dabar ne tiek tekstais, nors pat ir tekstais, beje, aš nepaminėjau, ten Vilniaus istorijos yra verčiamos lietuvių kalba, Meelis brokas yra išvertęs. Šiaip tai aš tikiuosi, kai tai pasirodys, jo knygą Aukso žmogus stende galima nusipirkti. Ir tikiuosi, kad ir Haskos knygos vertimas kažkada bus lietuvių kalba. Bet man iš tiesų labai smalsu paklausti apie tą skirtingų šalių rašytojų kasdienybę. Nes tarkim, lietuvių literatūra yra toks specifinis reiškinys. Mes tarsi neturime profesionalių rašytojų, nes nei vienas rašytojas iš tiesų negyvena vien tik iš rašymo. Tai kaip yra jums, kas yra jūsų pagrindinė veikla, rašymas, kitos veiklos, kaip ir kada rašote? Kaip atrodo tas skirtingų šalių rašytojų kasdienybė? Daina?
Labai gerai, iš tikrųjų, lietuvių rašytojai, ir aš tikrai, tai nėra mūsų darbas, tai nėra mūsų galbūt pagrindinė tokia veikla, kažkokia profesionali veikla, galima išvadinti. Kas tikrai mane nustebino viešinti Europoje ir šiuo metu, kad būtent ten apie literatūrą kalbama kaip apie profesionalią darbo rinką, sritį, kurioje rašytojai dirba, darbuojasi ir daro nuolat, tai yra pagrindinė veikla. Tai buvo man tokių didžiausimas, kada išgirsti, nes tikrai Lietuvoje neturime tokio įspūdžio, ypač tokio malonumo ir nematėm savo paleisti. Tai galbūt mano iš tikrųjų kasdienybė yra greta visų tų darbų, greta darbų, kurie išdirbtų iš ko gyvenu. Bet aš jaučiuosi, kad literatūros rašymas, tekstų rašymas man nevirsta darbą. Ir netenka išgyventi kažkokių terminų ar kažkokių spaudimų. Aš stengiuosi kaip man atsiriboti ir pajusti tą tekstą rašymo malonumą, tą galėjimą rašyti, kad noriu rašyti, kad galiu rašyti. Man asmeniškai yra turbūt svarbiau dirbti literatūrą arba dirbti su literatūra ir ženklinti literatūrą. Žodžiu, aš laikau tą didžiulę atskirtį ir tą požiūrį susitikimą Europoje. Manau, čia išgirsime tikrai labai skirtingus.
Haska?
Yes, that is. Actually, to be honest, I stopped being embarrassed saying I'm a writer and after I got the EUPL prize. So thanks very much to EUPL. I can say to people, yes, I'm a writer, I'm writing books, because before I was thinking, okay, I'm just having some side hobby, like just like writing, putting words together. Of course, I always had a real job, and I was running a business since I was 19, and also like for like last 7 years, I'm engaged in reproductive work, as it's feminists say today. I have a daughter, so I have to do more things like connected to daily routine, so you cannot be as lazy as before anymore. And but for me, I'm really jealous that like writing is always such a pleasure and relaxation, because for me writing is hard work. And actually, it's interesting because although like my daily routines are not connected with writing every day, I still see it as writer's job. Like, you know, there is this picture when there is a guy on the couch and there is the note saying scientist at work, because he's thinking, yeah? And like as a writer, I collect material every day, everywhere. That's why I think my experience in like running business is very important, because for example, in my book there is a whole chapter, like the hero spends in tax inspection, getting her paperwork done. So I do think that we do our writer's work every day and everywhere, gathering these experiences, but like to do like real writing, to put like letters into words and words into sentences and sentences into chapters, I really need to switch off. I really need to go to writer's residence, stay disconnected from like daily routines, from family life for at least a few weeks to produce something. I'm not as, I don't know, skillful and flexible as other writers who can do it in betweens. Yeah, so that's my story.
I would say that when in Lithuania you said you don't have this professional writer, it's usually the saying goes that for one professional writer you need at least 1 million people. So it depends on the population, but at the same time, recently in Estonia, they established a stipendium for writers, and this means that you actually can become a professional writer. But only for 3 years. So it means that whether you just take the leap and become a professional writer for 3 years, and then you ask the questions, what will happen afterwards? Whether you are successful of applying for an extended stipend for another 3 years, it depends on many things. So it's always been risky. Most of writers also in Estonia have some other job. I'm a researcher in university, and I think that this is actually very good for my writing, because most of what I have written 3 novels now, is connected to the research that I'm doing. So research and fiction have very common themes, and I feel that when I'm writing articles about historical questions, then there is always some material that I can't put into an article as scientific article, because it's something that I don't have enough material to really prove that it was so. And you actually can't put moods and feelings and these emotions into a scientific article. But in fiction you can do that, and I feel that it's exactly these themes or these thoughts that I have risen during research that helped me to just develop my fiction. So it has worked really well, and in a way I just try to maintain the balance, and I would not want to be only writer, and I would not want to be only researcher, because I feel that they are sort of supporting the other identity that I have. So it's also so that when I'm writing something, fiction writing, then it helps to think things through, so you get a better understanding of the period, better understanding of the world that people lived, And when you are afterwards starting to write a research article, then you have this different background to that already, so that you maybe feel more comfortable in the world after that.
Will I make millions and millions of pounds off my writing, to be honest? No, I don't. I'm joking. We don't have any professional writers in Northern Ireland either. I guess maybe there's an understanding that when you write in English that there is a wider readership for your books, and I know how fortunate I am to write in English, and I always feel quite guilty when I come to places like this and I realise that folks are writing in a language that isn't spoken as much as English is. But it's still quite a hard graft for writers in Northern Ireland. We don't have stipends from the government. I'm quite jealous of you.
For 6 people only. So.
Oh, for 6 people, yeah. So we don't get very much support from the government, and so most of us, what we do is a kind of mishmash of just about everything that will pay us. So I'm very, very lucky. Everything that I do is in some way related to writing. I write books, I teach creative writing, I program literary festivals, I make documentaries for the BBC, whoever will give me money that's roughly related to books, I will say yes to it. But I totally agree with what everybody has said here, that quite often the secondary job that you do, it becomes more than just something that creates money. It actually inspires and speaks into your work. And for me, the biggest thing has been, for the last 20 years, I have been a community arts facilitator. And in Belfast, a lot of the groundwork that came after the Peace and Reconciliation Agreement in 1998 was done through the arts. So the arts became a space where Protestants and Catholics could be brought together to discuss their experiences, to find ways that they were similar and not just always different. And it was writers, artists, theatre makers, filmmakers who facilitated a lot of that. So I'm really passionate about that, and I think I would be pretty angry if I didn't get time to work in the communities around Belfast. Partially because they're the communities I write about, and I never want to be one of those writers who writes about something from a kind of lofty distance and isn't engaged with it. So this particular book was written about the neighbourhood that I live in and I work in and I write in as well, and that kind of closeness of where you make your money is also what you write about really works for me. And I love that it's nice to be here and talk to all of you guys who I imagine are readers and love books and are very well read. When I go back next Wednesday to work with my elderly ladies who live in the Falls and Shankill Road on either side of the Peace Wall we still have up in Belfast, they don't care. They don't read books. They're not interested in who's winning the big literary prizes. What they're interested in is story, and I have to turn up with stories for them and engage them and help them to share their story. And that really keeps me humble as a writer, but it also gives me an awful lot of material as well.
Labai ačiū visiems dalyviams, man atrodo, mes truputėlį sugebėjome priskleisti tą skirtingumą ir daug panašumą tiek kūrybos sampratų, tiek ir rašytojo galimybės. Aš dar turėjau tą amžinai banalų klausimą apie ateities planus, bet jo jau nebespėsiu užduoti. Norėčiau, aišku, padėkoti svečiams Meeliui, Haskai ir Dainai. Meelio knygą vertimą Melancholiją galite rasti Aukso žvaigždėse. Dainos knygą Žemų piramidės galite rasti Lietuvos rašytojų Almos literatūros Tito Albasėse. Aš nežinau, ar jūs dalinsite autografus, galbūt skaitytojai mano, už kuriuo metu jūs turėsite Dainą. Taigi Daina ir jos knygą galite rasti 19 valandą šį vakarą, jeigu galės pasirašyti ir pašnekėti. Meeli, ar jūs galima bus Aukso žvaigždėse rasti ir dalinsite autografus?
Maybe, I don't know. Okay, yeah.
I know better. Meeli jau visai galite
And books.
Tada pirmą valandą pasivartyti jo romaną ir aš labai tikiuosi, kad Daina ir Haskos knygos greitai bus išverstos ir kitais metais galėsime iš jų paprašyti pavyzdžių. Taigi ačiū jums visiems ir dėkui, kad